Jack and Grace Harper had been together for 42 years, half of them spent in a small coastal house in Maine, where the ocean wind hit the rocks and the cries of seagulls replaced alarm clocks. Once their home had been full of noise, kids running through the hallway, friends dropping by for dinner, laughter from the porch. Now only silence lived there, a silence so thick it felt like another wall between them. They'd both retired the same year. Jack had been a locomotive engineer, a man who trusted the rhythm of metal more than the rhythm of people. Grace, an elementary school teacher who could calm a room full of restless children with just her voice. The first morning after retirement, they sat down for breakfast and didn't know what to say. For the first time in decades, no clock told them to hurry. No schedule pushed them forward. Just coffee and the strange emptiness that followed every sip. "Jack," Grace said one day, watching him repair the same old bicycle again, "when was the last time you did something not out of habit?" He didn't look up. "Habit's what keeps the wheels turning." She smiled sadly. Maybe that's the problem. Their days began to blend together, a soft, quiet routine that neither hurt nor healed. On Fridays, Jack played cards with old friends at the Harbor Cafe. Grace painted seascapes from the kitchen window, the same rocks, the same water, over and over. They were near each other, but not with each other. Until one ordinary afternoon changed everything. Grace came back from the market and saw a white van parked by their house. A young man stepped out, holding a camera. "Mrs. Harper?" "I'm with the Portland Chronicle. We'd love to talk about your painting." "My painting?" she asked, confused. "The Sleeping Island. It just won first place in the regional art show." Grace froze. She had painted something like that, but she'd never shown it to anyone. That evening, she faced Jack in the kitchen. "You took my painting." He blinked. "I did. I thought, you deserve to be seen. I just dropped it off at the gallery." "You didn't even ask. I wanted to surprise you." "You did," she said quietly, "just not the way you think." It wasn't anger in her voice. It was disappointment, the kind that comes when someone steals a choice, not a thing. For Jack, it was a gesture of love. For Grace, it was proof that even after all these years, he still didn't listen. The next morning, she drove to Portland. Inside the gallery, under soft lights, hung her painting. A little tag beneath it read, "Grace Harper, The Sleeping Island." Sometimes even silence can be alive. She stood there for a long time, and in that moment, something shifted. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as someone's wife, not as Mrs. Harper, but as herself. When she came home, Jack was waiting by the window. "Well?" he asked. "It was beautiful," she said, "and I've made a decision." He frowned. "About what?" "I'm going to New Hampshire. The gallery invited me to exhibit next month." "You mean alone?" "Yes, alone." Jack didn't argue. He just stood there, silent. She packed a small suitcase, the same one she used decades ago for school trips. As she closed the door, she looked back once and realized that love isn't about how long you stay. It's about whether you still choose to go, when staying means disappearing. That night, Jack sat in the empty kitchen. The clock ticked. The ocean outside kept breathing. For the first time, silence didn't sound peaceful. It sounded like regret. He whispered to the empty chair across from him, "I should have asked. I should have listened." But the only answer came from the wind through the window, the same wind that once brought her laughter into this house. Grace hadn't planned to be gone long, maybe a week, maybe 2, but the moment she arrived in New Hampshire, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: space, not just around her, inside her. The art center was an old mansion that smelled of cedar and paint. Light spilled through tall windows, catching dust motes that looked like tiny sparks. A woman with silver hair and a colorful scarf greeted her warmly. "You must be Grace Harper. I'm Martha, the exhibition coordinator. We've all been waiting for you." Grace blinked. "Waiting for me?" The words felt foreign. Martha showed her to a small guest room overlooking a lake. On the nightstand sat a notebook with a single note inside. "It's never too late to begin again." Grace smiled, the kind of smile that begins as disbelief and ends as courage. She spent her first days painting quietly by the window. Mountains replaced the sea, but somehow the light was the same. Patient, forgiving. She didn't call Jack. He didn't call her. For once, the silence between them felt peaceful. Then one morning, the receptionist handed her a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat, slightly slanted. "Grace, I don't know what exactly I broke, but it feels like everything. The house is too quiet. Even the seagulls left. I look at your brushes on the table and think maybe the silence isn't because you're gone. Maybe it's because I never listened when you were here. If you stay there, stay free. Just know I'm proud of you. Jack." Grace read it twice, then a third time, and instead of tears, there was something gentler. Relief. Because for the first time in decades, Jack hadn't written to fix her. He'd written to see her. Back home in Maine, Jack was learning how to live without her. The first week was unbearable. The house felt too big, every sound too sharp. He tried to keep busy, but the wrench slipped from his hand more often than not. Eventually, he wandered to the harbor. Old fishermen gathered there, patching nets and telling stories that smelled of salt and memory. Jack sat beside one of them, a man with a beard white as driftwood. "You work alone?" Jack asked. 15 years now, the man said. "But when I'm out on the boat, I still talk to her. The sea listens better than most people." Jack smiled, more out of ache than humor. That night, he wrote again. "Grace, met a fisherman today. Says the sea listens better than people. Maybe that's why I always stayed near noise, engines, rails, metal. So I wouldn't have to hear what was missing. I'm trying to listen now. Jack." He sealed the letter, not knowing if it would reach her, but writing had become his way of breathing again. In New Hampshire, Grace found friends she hadn't expected. One of them was Henry, a retired art teacher with kind eyes and a crooked smile. He painted, but his real gift was conversation, the kind that didn't fill silence. It shaped it. They often sat by the lake, sharing tea from an old thermos. "You look like someone who's learning how to talk again," Henry said once. Grace chuckled softly. "Feels that way." "And how's it going?" "Strange," she admitted, "like my voice got rusty." He smiled. "Then keep talking. Rust falls off if you use it enough." She didn't see Henry as anything more than a friend, but she felt alive around him, like color was returning to her canvas. Then another letter arrived. "Grace, I bought paints. Can you believe that? Tried to paint our house. It came out crooked. Maybe because without you it is crooked. I've started helping the fishermen repair boats. For the first time in years, my hands do something that matters. Jack." Grace folded the letter carefully. Jack was changing, not for her, but for himself. And that, she realized, was the truest kind of love. But fate never stays quiet for long. One evening, Henry didn't show up for dinner. The next morning, Grace learned he'd been taken to the hospital. A heart attack. When she entered the room, tubes and monitors surrounded him. Still, his smile was the same. "You came," he whispered. "Of course I came." "Then I must have done something right," he said, half laughing, half breathing. Grace gripped his hand, afraid to let go. "You're not going anywhere, Henry." He smiled faintly. "Promise me one thing. Don't just paint with your hands. Paint with what scares you. That's where the real light is." That night, Grace cried. Not from grief, but from recognition. She realized that every person she'd met lately, Jack, Henry, even Martha, had been teaching her the same thing, that life doesn't end when you grow older. It begins again when you stop hiding from it. Hospitals have a strange silence, the kind that hums behind beeping monitors and tired footsteps. Grace sat beside Henry's bed, holding his hand as if her touch alone could keep his heart steady. The monitor blinked in rhythm, reminding her that life could hang by a single pulse. She opened the same notebook that had waited for her in New Hampshire, the one with the note, "It's never too late to begin again." On a blank page, she wrote 3 words in big, shaky letters: "Live. Don't delay." Next to them, she drew a small seagull, the way she used to draw with her students. Henry stirred. His eyes fluttered open. "You're still teaching me," he whispered. Grace smiled. "If life hits your heart that hard, you might as well give it something worth beating for." At that moment, she remembered the smell of home, the salt, the oil, the metal of the rail tracks. Jack. She could almost hear his voice, deep and steady, carried on the ocean wind. That night, she read aloud to Henry, lines from a book about light that lives inside the water. He fell asleep with a faint smile, and Grace whispered a quiet thank you to the world for giving her one more day. Back in Maine, Jack was learning the rhythm of mornings without noise. He woke before dawn, walked to the harbor, listened to the wooden planks creak beneath his boots. Men shouted, ropes slapped against poles, and for the first time, that noise didn't bother him. It kept him alive. He fixed old boats, repaired nets, carried boxes. Small, simple tasks, but they made his hands useful again. "Harper," one of the fishermen said, "you look different lately." Jack shrugged. "Maybe I finally stopped fighting the silence." The man nodded. "If silence talks back, it means you're doing something real." That night, Jack wrote again. "Grace, what scares you most when you face a blank canvas? Do you crave quiet or light? I don't know how to ask the right way, but I'm learning." He didn't expect an answer. It was enough to ask. For once in his life, that was progress. Then came the call. It was Martha from the art center. "Mr. Harper," she said softly, "Grace is here. She's okay, but she's been through a lot. One of her friends had a heart attack. She could use someone to talk to. Maybe someone who finally knows how." Jack hung up, stared at the wall for a long moment, then went to pack his old travel bag. The train to New Hampshire hummed like a lullaby. Stations passed, rails blurred, and Jack realized how strange it felt to travel without running away. He wasn't chasing, fixing, or explaining. He was simply going. To be there. When he arrived, Martha met him at the station. "You must be Jack," she said, smiling knowingly. "She's painting outside, right by the maple tree." He found her in the courtyard, sunlight spilling through red leaves. Grace sat cross-legged, painting the reflection of the clouds in a puddle. He stood a few feet away. "Hi," he said quietly. She looked up and smiled. Not surprised, not angry, just aware. "Hi, Jack." "I came to see you," he said, not to interrupt, just to sit nearby, if that's okay. She nodded toward the bench beside her. "Sit. The light's better here." They stayed silent for a while, not the old, heavy silence, but the kind that breathes. Finally, Jack said, "I never knew how to miss someone the right way. I used to drown it out, in work, in noise. But now I know missing you isn't pain. It's proof I had something worth missing." Grace smiled faintly. "You were never just a man of rails, Jack. You were just afraid to stop moving." He chuckled. "Maybe you were afraid to start." "Maybe we both were," she said. She turned the canvas toward him. A wide lake, a sky dissolving into blue, a maple tree trembling in the wind. "I'm painting space," she said. "I used to think emptiness was lonely, but it's just room for us to grow." "For talking?" Jack asked. "And for silence," she said softly, "the kind that heals." A week later, Henry came back from the hospital, paler, slower, but alive. He joined them in the courtyard one morning, holding a steaming thermos. "So you're the famous husband," he said with a grin. "And you," Jack replied, "must be the man who helped my wife find her heartbeat." Henry laughed weakly. "She helped me too. Guess we're even." That afternoon, the 3 of them went to the lake. Grace carried her paints, Jack carried her easel, Henry carried tea. The wind came in gusts, the water shimmered like glass. "Today," Jack said, "I'll be your assistant. Grace handles the colors, Henry controls the heart, and I'll handle the ropes if things get messy." "Deal," Henry chuckled. "But remember, the heart's in charge." The sky changed quickly. Wind turned fierce, blowing across the lake, knocking over the easel. A painting fell, splashing into the water. Grace gasped, reaching for it. Jack grabbed her arm, steadying her. "Wait," he said. "Look." The water had spread the paint, softening its edges, turning the mistake into light. "See?" he whispered. "You were always afraid of ruining things, but sometimes a storm just finishes the picture." Grace laughed, loud and free. Jack closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, a sound he hadn't realized he'd been starving for. That night, a real storm rolled in. Rain hammered the windows, thunder shook the harbor, then came a knock at the door. Martha, drenched, breathless. "The boats! The ropes are breaking! The old pier's giving out!" Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket. Grace and Henry followed. By the time they reached the dock, chaos had taken over. Waves smashing, ropes snapping. Jack scanned the scene like a man who'd done this 1,000 times. "There," he shouted. "That boat, LMA. If it drifts loose, it'll take the others with it." He sprinted toward the edge, Grace right behind him. Ropes whipped through the air, stinging his hands. He slipped once and almost went under. Grace lunged forward, grabbing his coat, pulling with everything she had. They both fell hard onto the wet wood, laughing breathlessly through the rain. "You're insane!" she yelled. "So are you!" he shouted back. "Guess we're even," she said, smiling. By morning, the storm was gone. The harbor was a mess, but safe. The fisherman clapped Jack on the shoulder. "Harper, you saved half the boats out there." He shook his head. "We did, and she knows knots better than any of you." Grace just smiled, brushing salt water from her hair. The following week, the Art Center held a small charity auction to rebuild the dock. Grace's water-damaged painting, the one the storm had finished, sold first. A young woman bought it and said, "It's imperfect, but it feels alive." And for the first time, Grace realized that maybe that's what they all were. Imperfect, but alive. That night, as the three of them sat by the fire, Henry handed them a small box. Inside were 3 paintbrushes and a brass tag engraved with one word, "Together." "Don't forget," he said. "Together doesn't mean holding on too tight. It means choosing to stay. Every day." Autumn came early to Maine. The air turned crisp, the sea softened to silver, and the horizon looked closer than ever. Grace and Jack spent their mornings stringing lights, hanging canvases, and helping neighbors carry tables down to the pier. Their little idea, days of light and sea, had grown into something real. People from nearby towns showed up with art, stories, photographs, and instruments. The harbor, usually quiet this time of year, suddenly buzzed like it hadn't in decades. Grace stood in the middle of it all, her hands covered in paint and joy. Jack walked by with a hammer and a grin. "Can you believe we pulled this off?" he asked. Grace looked around at the laughter, the colors, the old friends hugging. "I can't," she said, "and I don't ever want to wake up if it's a dream." By noon, the docks were full. An old band tuned their guitars. Kids ran with ribbons. The smell of cinnamon and coffee drifted through the air. And then she saw him. Henry walking carefully toward them with his cane and a small wrapped package under his arm. "You made it," she said, hugging him tightly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," he said. "Brought you something." He unwrapped the package. Inside was a painting. The sea after the storm. But instead of darkness, the waves glowed with light. In the center stood 2 small figures on a pier, holding each other, facing the horizon. "What's it called?" Grace asked softly. "The ones who learned to hold the wind," Henry said with a wink. Jack looked at it for a long moment, then clapped Henry's shoulder. "You nailed it," he said. Antian, the festival began with the sound of a violin and the smell of fresh bread. People gathered on the grass, chatting quietly, waiting for Grace to open the first exhibit, The Sea and Us. Inside hung dozens of paintings by retirees, widows, fishermen, teachers, all people who thought their stories were too small to matter. But here, under the lights, every canvas felt like a heartbeat. Martha arrived from New Hampshire just in time. "You two did something special," she told Grace. "This isn't just an art show. It's a reminder that growing old isn't a fade-out. It's an encore." Grace smiled, brushing away a tear. Jack stood nearby, arms crossed, pretending not to get emotional. By sunset, small problems started to appear. A loose tent, a blown fuse, a missing microphone. No one panicked. People held the tents down with their own hands, sang louder instead of using speakers, and turned the chaos into laughter. When the wind finally calmed, Grace stepped up on a small wooden crate. The crowd fell quiet. She didn't need a microphone. "When Jack and I started this," she said, her voice trembling just a little, "we didn't want to make an art festival. We just wanted to remind ourselves, and maybe all of you, that there's still light, even when you can't see it. And the sea? The sea doesn't only take. Sometimes it gives back." Jack joined her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes it even gives you back the people you thought you'd lost," he added. Grace smiled. Then, pulling out a small piece of paper from her pocket, she read aloud the same words that had guided her since that day in New Hampshire. "Live. Don't delay. Together." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the crowd began to clap. Slow at first, then growing louder, until the sound rolled like waves against the dock. It wasn't applause for a speech. It was for survival, for second chances. When night came, the harbor glowed under strings of lanterns. Jack and Grace sat on the pier, feet dangling over the dark water. The reflection of the lights shimmered like constellations below their shoes. "Remember," Grace said, leaning against him, "how I once wanted life to look like a painting?" Jack smiled. "It does now." "It's messier than I imagined," she laughed. "Yeah," he said, "but the best paintings always are." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sea breathe. Then Grace whispered, "Jack, I'm not afraid anymore." He squeezed her hand. "Neither am I." The next morning, the town woke to sunlight bouncing off the water. Children collected shells, artists packed their canvases, and the last boats rocked gently in the harbor. Grace found a letter slipped under their door. A postcard from Henry. "My heart's still beating in rhythm. I'll bring new brushes next year. Thank you for not leaving me in the storm. H." Grace folded it, smiling softly. She opened her notebook one last time. Beneath the words, "Live, don't delay, together," she added a final line, "and always begin again." She stepped outside. Jack was hanging the last lanterns, humming to himself. "Hey, engineer," she called. "How many carriages in our train of adventures?" Jack grinned. "As many as we can pull," he said. "And not a single one too many." They both laughed, the kind of laughter that belongs to people who've already lost enough not to waste time. The sea echoed them with a gentle wave, as if to say, "Yes, go on." And they did, because life, even after everything, always leaves room for one more beginning.